Good day, everyone. My name is Kumi Waleng Friedman, and I'm from the Melrose Gallery. The Melrose Gallery has the great pleasure to present the panel discussion, A Common Reality. The discussion between artists Arlene-Amaler Raviv and Dale Yudelman will be moderated by Ashraf Jamal. Ashraf Jamal is a research associate in visual identities at the Art and Design Research Center at the University of Johannesburg. In addition to that, he is an author, curator, and cultural theorist. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much, Kumi. And firstly, I'd like to welcome the two extremely talented, well-seasoned, great South African artists, Dale Yudelman and Arlene-Amaler Raviv. Firstly, I want to first congratulate you on your recent collaboration. But of course, the two of you have been working for many, many years. And I'm intrigued, given the fact that Dale is a photographer and Arlene, if you don't mind my saying it, is an expressionist in terms of painting, in terms of the medium that inspired you most, which is one of the most strikingly important phenomena in South African painting, with this huge inheritance from German art history. But what interests me is, in terms of the collaboration between the two of you, is Dale as a photographer, you as a painter. Firstly, how does it work? How did it come about working together? And when did it start?
I moved to Cape Town from Joburg in 1996 and set up a studio above Mama Africa. And there I met Dale, who is also from Joburg, in fact, in the same suburb as we lived. And I never knew him there, and he met me in Mama Africa. And
that's how we connected. That was probably in 1996 or 7. I got to South Africa after spending 10 years away in London and Los Angeles, and after the elections in 94, I decided to come back to South Africa and settled in Cape Town in 1996. So we met soon after that.
Well, the timing is very striking because, of course, it's 2 years after the South African democratic elections. It's a new moment in the history of the country. There's in many ways been profoundly compromised and profoundly damaged by the legacies of colonialism and apartheid. And in fact, those legacies still remain. We're still struggling to redeem ourselves from that. But the reason I'm bringing this issue up around connecting in a moment of democracy and yet having a very strong sense of South African history, coming from the same suburb, in fact, in Johannesburg as well, having a strong sense of Johannesburg culture shipped to Cape Town, which is in many ways a very different world vision and a different culture. And yet, because of the various moves from various parts, Dale from California, you from the Highveld, for lack of a better word, working together and to tell a new South African story. This is what interests me. I think the two of you embody that even though you are seasoned and highly established artists, you also have a strong sense of emergency, a new idea of emergent culture, a new value of how to tell the story of South Africa. Can you talk about that? I mean, how did that come about?
Well, I think looking at my background before I moved to London and the States, I was working as a photojournalist for The Star. Started out there in 79 and worked through till 1986, and that's when I left South Africa after the state of emergency. So I think you're very right in saying that there was quite a lot of excitement. I was excited to be back in South Africa after the elections of 94. We connected soon after that, full of enthusiasm about the new South Africa, and speaking with each other, we kind of, the collaboration just kind of started very, very slowly, just about talking and how we could work together, and the ideas that we had at the time about South Africa, about my experiences in the States, and all of these new things that were happening. And the focus of our first exhibition together, called One, which was at the AVA Gallery in Cape Town, I think embodied that sort of energy of us coming together and creating this work together.
My focus about moving here as you said, the difference between Joburg and Cape Town. My focus was in 1990, seeing a photograph of Mandela. I began a huge big portrait, 2 meters by 2 meters of him. And after that, continued to question what was going on in the country and just had a sensibility of the different feelings that were happening in our country, but I was based in Cape Town. So it was quite difficult to access, but I actually did.
You know what I find intriguing about the way in which you tell the South African story, and that's Dale and yourself, Arlene, is that neither of you, I would consider to be protest artists, by which I mean you're not trying to make political statements or emblazon them in your work, but what you are trying to do is tell the story of a human evolution and transformation. So there's a subtlety and a compassion in the way that you work individually, but also in the way that you work together. I mean, I just want to bring up the one example, you know, your very famous collaborative work, Joburg Man. Could you talk a bit more about that? Because what interests me is that here we have this idea of the Black male figure as a giant, but he's also the embodiment of what Dale spoke about in many ways, about migrant labor, about disenfranchisement, about homelessness, and that sense which remains with us in terms of Black history. So that figure is both an empowered figure, but also a figure that to me somehow is emblematic of a history of indenture, slavery, and oppression. Can you discuss how you came about it and how the collage actually worked? Because it's absolutely stunning.
Well, we did an exhibition called One, as Dale just said, in 2000. And the last image of a huge exhibition in the ABA, it filled each room, was the Joburg Man. And how it came about was Dale had a photograph of Johannesburg 100 years ago on his table where we worked at his computer. And we decided to put one of the last people that we photographed into this image and expose him as a giant man, the man who toiled the soil and worked with the city and built our city. And why we used the bag was, for me, it was the commodity, what he bought and what he was able to buy and where he was able to access at this point in time.
Well, I have to congratulate the two of you on an incredibly inspired artwork, which for me probably is one of the most iconic in the history of South African art. For the reasons that you are conveying, but for me, what you have just said, Arlene, rings far deeper, because what you're trying to do is tell the story of the history of this country, the history of nobility and humility, the history of struggle, and also, all importantly, what is often forgotten is the depth and quiet of Black experience. Why should Black experience always be constructed excessively or hysterically or in a declamatory and loud and noisy way? Why should it automatically protest be defined that way as fist thumping? Why can't it be something that is more everyday? Which brings to me one of the key things, or the things joins the two of you profoundly, is in many ways what both of you do and brilliantly represent in your individual works and together is the marvel of the everyday, the marvel of ordinary lives, the marvel of being a human being. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I can say that in the exhibition of One, it was exactly that, Ashraf. It was exactly that everyday, ordinary man who was in the city walking. We in fact Dale shot outside the police station in Cape Town on that flat cement wall. He shot hundreds of images of these walking men. And that last one was chosen for Joburg Man. But it was always around the everyday occurrence. There were titles like Wednesday Morning, 8 a.m. meeting place. So it was all about the workman in the city. Right. And yeah.
I think your description of the work and not sort of hammering home big sort of ideas about, sort of protest art is that I'd done quite a bit of that working at the Star and was, involved in covering all the political upheaval at the time. And after spending time in 10 years in California and then coming back, I was always more interested in the more subtleties of life, and just for the two of us to be working together just opened up a lot of avenues for us to look at things differently and together. And it's quite difficult to explain or figure out why collaborations work, because there's a lot of elements to them. But I think initially it was about meeting Arlene and seeing her work that I'd never seen before, and really just loving what she was doing and identify with the way that she painted and the kind of messages that she was putting through. And I think you might feel the same way about the work that I was doing later on as well. So we could identify with each other, and I think that common idea of looking at reality in a similar way, with empathy and with excitement, kind of drew us together, and that's the reason why we continued to work for so many years.
The other thing that brings, because of you belong to a generation that was very much a part of the struggle of 90s protest culture. What's interesting, and you also will remember from the past, you know, the Dompas, the passbook, the way in which the Black body, the Black man and woman were perpetually surveyed, you know, and sort of that sense of constantly being oppressed by a white minority, how this image, the scale of it, the sense of freedom in the movement, the idea of a man no longer being tyrannized by the passbook, by the Dompas, a man who is the embodiment of freedom. And that is, to me, what makes it a great vision of liberatory art in this country, and one that will remain historically very much a part of South African history. But in the more broader sense, what your work tells me, again, independently and together, is your great appreciation with everyday life in the streets, finding ways to see the world in ways that are enabling and productive and life-inspiring. I brought up this notion of a common reality. What you're trying to do is find what connects people rather than what separates people. And I think that is a very powerful way, a very empathetic way of engaging with the world through art. The way you combine the ordinary and extraordinary to do with, for example, the manipulation of scale, the creating of an everyday superhero. What you're trying to do is try to show the magic in ordinary lives. Instead of trying to create the spectacular, you're trying to actually celebrate the miraculous in the everyday.
I can give you a good example, Ashraf. We did a whole series of The City and I, based on the fact of all the people that Dale photographed. And it was a large triptych called The City and I, exactly of the people in everyday life. And one of the people I was so fascinated by in Long Street, I live on Long Street, is a man called Tulani. And that man was an icon in South Africa. And he had walked from somewhere in Africa to Long Street, to the center of Cape Town. And he carried cardboard, you know, the collection of the cardboard, and you carry it on your, to the place where you can get a little bit of money. And people called him 50 cents. And he was really uneducated. And I brought him into the gallery at the time of the exhibition. And I said to him, Tulani, look, there's an image of you, there's a photograph of you in this painting. And he couldn't exactly work out the negatives and positive spaces of it. But that's one way of drawing in the actual people from the street, which we did very often, the street children and the people.
Well, that, again, I feel that's an incredible innovation on your part, because what you're trying to do is break down the rarefied idea of the gallery and who is allowed access to the art world. I'm trying to create the element of transparency and openness to create a new kind of traffic and a new access for art by telling the stories of the street, by telling the stories of people who one might sort of dismiss to have actually no value, which is a criminal way to treat any human being. But what you've done is actually show no, everybody possesses nobility, irrespective of their caste, their class, their income, their race, their gender, their sexual persuasion. There's a sense, again, of inclusivity way before, the new woke culture. You were basically talking about the sense of a much more proactive way to understand the entire human family. And your description, Arlene, typifies that, as does your famous image. I think it's the one that ended up in the silo that you and Dale worked on. I think it's the one with the woman with the load on her head. And I'm thinking of Kentridge's famous production, The Head and the Load, you know, that idea of carrying a weight, being a beast of burden, but at the same time, carrying a weight with such incredible dignity and personal strength.
Yeah, the silence building happened from Cell C. They scanned Cape Town for images, and they came up with our 3 paintings, one on each side of the silos of the Museum. And that image I had been painting for maybe 10 years, of the woman carrying the burden. It came from an Ernest Makorba image of Elsa Miles wrote this book, and she said that he had quoted both her hands full. And so I continued to paint that image of the woman struggling to support the family and carrying the burden on her head, the burden of the whole family and the nation. And that's where that image came from. So it was 30 meters on the silo building. And
what year was that? Do you remember?
It was 2002.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is long before the Arch was created.
That's true, actually. Yes.
Pinpointed those silos as a great place to display this, and you could actually see these 3 artworks from pretty much anywhere in Cape Town way back then. I just want to just bring up one more point about talking about the different gallery spaces, in that our second collaborative exhibition, called Where the Mountain Meets the City, was actually hosted. We found a space on Long Street, and the gist of that exhibition was all the views of looking at all the side streets of Long Street that headed off towards the mountain. So we almost brought that artwork to the place that we were talking about, and in that way, it also made it accessible for everyone in that area to come and look at the work and appreciate what we were trying to do.
That is the profound endeavor that the two of you are able to do collaboratively extremely well. The fact that you create a world that is inclusive, that is humane, but at the same time, you both have an uncanny ability to generate iconic imagery. This is the other thing. I mean, that is one of the biggest challenges for any artist, and you've managed to do it together supremely well. Again, the image of the woman as load bearer, as the carrier of the burden of history, the burden of families, the burden of the Black body, the burden of womanhood. You know, all of these you're able to synthesize with such uncanny skill, and neither of you seem to have had, maybe Dale has had, a brilliant advertising career. Yet at the same time, there's something in the way the synergy between you, the way you work, the way you combine ideas. You're able to pull the audience so fully into your world, and makes the audience trust you so fully. And that's the remarkable thing. Most viewers, when they look at artwork, feel guarded or perplexed, or they can't connect. Yet in your world, you create one of the rarest things. You allow the audience into your world vision, and you create a space of unbelievable comfort and joy and inspiration. And I want to thank you both for that amazing contribution to South African history.
Thank you.
Now, the other thing I wanted to actually talk about is your recent exhibition that you've worked on together called LIVESTOCK, which happened at the Melrose Gallery. The reason I want to jump there is because what's interesting is that there's a humanity, yes, there's an iconicity, yes, there's an incredible ability to collaborate, yes. In this particular work, though, what you choose is African currency, African banknotes. How did that idea come? Again, an iconic product, a transactional product, a product that everybody needs and everybody's defined through. How did money come about?
Well, I'll just, we're talking quite a long time ago. I think, when was the LIVESTOCK created?
In 2003.
2003. I've actually got a little prop here. You can see all our banknotes in case we run out of bread. But I think we actually used the dollar bill in our first exhibition. Very small work.
Yeah.
Dollar bill, and Arlene had painted a figure over it, and it just kind of stuck with us, and we were kind of thinking about doing some new work together. And we walked around Milnerton collecting all these Southern African banknotes. And after a lot of discussion, and I think what prompted the exhibition or that particular work is that we were invited to exhibit at the Havana Biennale in Cuba, which was around 2003 or 4. Yeah. And so we specifically actually created this work for that Biennale. We were representing South Africa in the show, and we wanted to create something that spoke not only about South Africa, but about the surrounding countries that we find ourselves integrating with and learning from and things like that. So it was quite a long sort of hall of discussion and figuring which notes to actually use in the end. And again, with the technical side of things, back then it was a little bit more difficult to combine photographic images with painting. How do you get things onto substrates? But I, for one, was quite interested in playing with different ways of presenting work as well. So that also helped move our collaborative process into different ways of presenting work together, whether it was silk screening onto fabric or printing onto glass or silk screening onto metal. So all these factors also had quite a big play in how we did our work.
And I was very involved at that point with always working on different substrates. And I had done the show where the mountain meets the city on aluminium and on glass. And I wanted so much to have some kind of fabric that was transparent, like the currency. And we chose to use a cloth called Fiji cloth, which is transparent and moves in the wind. So it wasn't stretched, it wasn't flat. So the currency actually moved within the space. When I went to Cuba, we hung it in a jail, and it was hung 3 stories high on a design that we created of a kind of sculpture made of aluminium, so that it floated like a scale, and all the money, and the people could walk through it. Yeah.
Well, this is, again, a remarkable achievement on both your parts, because, again, you're demonstrating incredible innovation in terms of actually setting up installation art, in terms of using new materials, new mediums. I mean, today, for example, we speak about materiality and textiles very normatively. Art is supposed to manipulate and explore new materials, but you were doing it at an early point in South African art history, 2002, 2003. But the thing is, again, what you're dealing with when you look at money, people say, how sacrilegious. You are painting on a banknote. People live for money. People desperately need money. And at the same time, you're perverting this grotesque capitalist obsession, turning a banknote to exactly what it is, a surface for another layer, a surface for art, a surface for transaction. But it's also explaining that art is transactional, that art is also about money. Literally, you're working with money, but art is about money. Otherwise, how the hell are artists going to survive? So the conceit is so acutely intelligent. That's what I'm saying. It's such a brilliant maneuver. But also the other thing, Dale and Arlene, what's amazing about it again is because of Dale's acute sense of stylization, his incredible ability to experiment with new ways of reproducing imagery, yours with your major inheritance of German expressionism, your free flow between Dale's rigor and your freedom. There's this incredible new synergy that comes up. You must continue to work together, because obviously this is a match made in heaven.
Yeah, thanks for that. When we announced that we were going to do this talk and thinking about collaborative work, because we in fact haven't actually done any new work for the last 10 years or 12 years, but we still, as you can see, we still talk to each other. And it got me thinking about collaborative processes, and I always kind of think about music essentially with different bands, and how delicate it actually is, and sometimes quite difficult to get in with somebody and create something that, you know, you've got different ideas and come together. And you can see that in music, like the Police, for instance, on their last final album, I think their third album, you know, they just hated each other, and they couldn't even sit in the same rooms while they were recording their last album. But you know, we had a few hits, but you know, the work kind of kept us together. The livestock you're talking about now is prints of that original Cuban exhibition. So they're not exactly like the ones that were original. They're not on cloth. They're actually on print. But we resurrected that to kind of give it a bit of life, because that early work was seen in Cuba, and Standard Bank bought it for their collection, but it never really showed it in its entirety. So it gave us an opportunity to show the work again in a different format. And as far as painting on the notes, you know, it's the notes in themselves were artworks in a way. And so Arlene's the way that she treated the painted marks and the integration was just like quite amazing, and the way we chose what pictures would go with a particular country, and that was quite important. If you go to each note, and you'll see descriptions of how the images and the painting works to tell a story about that country.
Yeah, I can give you an excellent example of one of the notes was Zimbabwe. So in Milnerton, we found a Zimbabwe note for $20. And at that very point, bread, it was announced, bread was $20 for a half a loaf of bread. So it was really, really, really a comparative exercise. And we used in the background the stock exchange numbers and the rocks, the monumental rocks. So the three images correlated like that, and it was a very, very strong, powerful image.
Again, conceptually extremely tight. And the other thing that's extremely interesting about this is that South Africa historically has been isolated and divorced from the rest of the continent in terms of people's understanding of their place in the world. What you're doing as well is reminding us about the other countries and realms in Africa. And as one American buffoon said, I mean, Africa is a country. Well, of course it's not. You know, it's a vast world with many, many cultures, many values, many world visions. And what you've done is basically through that core principle in your vision of unifying the world, bringing the different countries together, showing us as part of a greater African family, and of course, a greater global family. That incredible inclusivity in your vision, in your joint vision, again, is utterly astonishing. But in terms of what Dale is saying, you know, not having collaborated in 11, 12 years, please, you have to come up with a project together, because you are history makers. You are a team that is archetypal in the history of South African art, and we need to see you collaborating on something together in the future.
You never know. Thanks for all of that. You know, we might plan like a reunion tour in 2000. But yeah, stay tuned. You never know. I mean, we're working on our own things, and we have been for a while. But not to say that we still connect, and we'll see what happens.
I would just like to say about the livestock and what you're talking about, global references and that. We had to cut off somewhere, so we cut off on the Southern African countries so that we didn't continue because we had more time before we went to Cuba. And the last image we did was the New York Stock Exchange, an aerial view of it, which for me tied the whole thing together, because it was an aerial view, you could see all the wires and all the interconnections from the computers. And those wires reminded me of the insides of cattle. And that brought me to the point of the lobola. So it brought Africa together with the global idea. And that last image that I painted of the cattle onto the New York Stock Exchange in certain places, that for me tied the whole thing together.
Again, a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant concept. That's the thing. I mean, you're bringing together sort of global currency, bring together Western capitalism, African tradition and culture. infusing it again in surprisingly innovative ways. Your art as a team makes the viewer think. You bring us to full attention, but not by startling us or shocking us or being provocative, but actually by coolly and subtly and highly intelligently sort of reeling us in to the layers and layers and layers which your work is able to embrace and effortlessly work together. And that's the key thing. I mean, it's the effortlessness of the complexity of what you do, which is brilliant, you know. And again, I think that defines why your work historically will remain and why it needs to be celebrated now and why it needs domestic, continental, and global attention. So we will work together on pushing that initiative forward and seeing what the two of you can bring together again. From my perspective, I feel like I've actually, you know, I feel we've covered the core dimensions. Is there anything else that you wish to actually address? Yes.
Yes,
Arlene.
I would like to bring to the audience the idea of Joburg Man being so successful. It was an edition of 99. The prints are 1.62 by a meter on canvas and printed by a master printer. And through an idea of yours, Ashraf, actually, we've decided to make an extra edition of 99 for people so that it's accessible to them. And it's a much smaller version and it's on paper so that it's more accessible price-wise. And yeah.
Well, that's brilliant news again, because basically understanding the importance of merchandising history and understanding the value of something, because people like me can't afford, you know, the art that you make, but this is heartening to know that something at this scale is happening and that the common human being, the common man and woman who has a love of art and wants to breathe in the iconicity of the work you create and they can have it in their homes. How do we showcase and market those works? And how will they be advertised? How do the audience get access? How can they buy it? Online?
You tell us. We want to give it to all the people who want to have one moment of our work.
Yeah,
but the marketing.
I think it's going to take a couple of weeks to figure out the logistics of it, but we will. As far as the size goes, it is a decent size. It's about 90 centimeters by, I think, 55. So it's a very decent size, and I've seen the first print of it, and it looks really beautiful on paper. So we'll probably be launching it through the usual media, Facebook, Instagram type of thing, and it will be out there in the next couple of weeks.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to Arlene-Amaler Raviv, to Dale Yudelman, and to Ashraf Jamal. Thank you for that riveting conversation. For those of you who would like to continue to interact with the content, please don't hesitate to visit us at www.themelrosegallery.com, as well as on all our social media platforms. Please note that the LIVESTOCK collection is still accessible on themelrosegallery.com, as well as at the Melrose Gallery in Melrose Arch in Johannesburg. Thank you to all, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Goodbye.